sir.
All right.
Nice intro. Thank you. Hi, everybody. How are you doing today? Please come in. As Alejandro said, I am with AOL News, Huffington Post, and normally what I'd be doing right now in New York would be sitting at my desk, just piling over, sweating over the latest story that my editor has jumped all over me to get done by 6 o'clock tonight. Whether it's UFOs, new information about UFOs, or, and I love saying this, the video of an alleged woolly mammoth. Have any of you heard of the woolly mammoth story? Yeah. Yeah, bear with a fish. Well, my favorite one is a fish with a bear. That was the better one, I thought. But today I'm not talking about woolly mammoths. I'm not even showing a woolly mammoth. I don't believe in them. So what's nice about being here today is instead of writing stories, I get to tell a few stories. And that will be a little more fun for me. And again, I'm not going to be able to cover every single aspect of UFOs in the media, how the media has covered UFOs, flying saucers over the decades. You've got so many great speakers here this week that we'll all be adding to the entire story, hopefully. And I was so sorry to hear that Dr. Bruce Maccabee is not with us because he's one of the best. I think a good place to start would probably be at the beginning of the modern era of UFOs. And back to that fateful day in 1947 when Kenneth Arnold was flying a small plane near Mount Rainier in Washington, and he spotted 9 objects, strange-looking objects, flying in formation near the mountain. He later told a reporter that they flew like a saucer would if you could skip it across the water, and that's how the term flying saucer was born. And here's Arnold showing up a drawing of what he claimed he saw that day in the mountains. I want to ask you all something. I like doing this, and you don't have to answer me because we can talk about it later. I would like you to see if you can remember the very first time that you ever heard the term UFO or flying saucer. And I'm not talking about from a movie or a book that you read or a comic book. That moment when you can remember that you became aware that there was this thing called UFOs or flying saucers, something possibly real. For me, it was when I was in the 4th grade. And it was about one of the most publicized stories of an early UFO report. The reason I say the 4th grade, because I went to school that day, and the teacher said they were going to do some tests of us. And they brought in these big boxes that had these multicolored folders. And it was apparently going to be some kind of a comprehension learning or test to see how well we do in the 4th grade at 10 years old. Reading something, retaining it, and then being asked questions about it later. And I recall that they just basically said, go to the box and pick out something. And I reached in, and I had in front of me a story about this Captain Thomas Mantell, who was with the Kentucky National Guard. And the story went on to talk about how he climbed into his jet and pursued a very large circular-shaped object high in the altitude, and he could never get close enough to it to pin it down. And the end result of the story was that he crashed and he died after pursuing this, and it was a high-altitude UFO chase. Here's an artist's description of what it might have looked like as he was trying to approach it. Now, prior to this case, most media reports about UFOs and flying saucers pretty much ridiculed or downplayed all the reports and the people who made the reports. But it was the Mantell story that started to change the public perception of UFOs, because this was a case where someone allegedly died as a result of a UFO encounter. It wasn't anymore in the realm of, oh, what are UFOs, what are flying saucers, why are they here? Now there was the possibility that there was some hostile intent behind them. and the public became more aware of this, and maybe even a little more uneasy. The story of what happened to Mantell has been disputed for decades, as you can imagine, and yet in 2001, an historical marker was unveiled in Franklin, Kentucky, by the Simpson County Historical Society in Mantell's honor. So that was the story that I read in the 4th grade that day when I was 10 years old. And my mind fully couldn't grasp whether or not this was something real. And that's a problem that mainstream media has always had issues with, how to accurately report and analyze UFO information. And as you probably know, UFOs are not a modern thing. Around the world, there have been a number of instances going back to ancient times, to ancient cave drawings, where men and women who were the early persons of media back then. You know how the New York Times has their modern slogan of all the news that's fit to print? Well, I like to think that ancient people were referring to it as all the news that's fit to paint, because that's what they did on cave drawings. People who only had cave walls as their tapestry. So they drew what they experienced in their lives. Here's another one. This is from France, over 16,000 years ago. It's been dated. And again, they recorded what they saw, and including things in the sky. I mean, certainly, you can't help but wonder, what was this thing in the sky? It generally resembles many of the things that you see in this picture. This is a group of UFO drawings created by Stanford Univ psychologist R.N. Shepard. It was intended to be used for a 1968 congressional investigation of UFOs. And all of these pictures that you see here, these are all based on actual photographs. Again, I'm not saying that the photographs were real UFOs, hoaxes, faked ones, but at least the pictures that were used are very consistent. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, the late astronomer, the dean of UFOs, used to say that the consistency factor of UFOs is really important. People are not reporting flying pink elephants around the world. He said, because if they were, well, then that's what we'd be getting photographs of. But that's not what they were reporting. They're reporting things like this. We move along in our little timeline of recorded UFO history, and this timeline includes the works of the Renaissance and medieval art, where strange circular objects often seem to show up in the sky of many paintings. This is a 15th century example called Madonna and Child with Infant St. John the Baptist. We've seen many examples of this kind of artwork. But yet the artist included something else in the painting that kind of seems to defy logic. If you look at it, there's something in the sky there behind and above the Madonna. And you know, at first look, if you go into a museum to see where the original painting is hung, you might not realize what it is, but then if you zoom in on it, then we have a whole different situation. This looks remarkably like one of several of those objects that I just showed you from the congressional investigation. But the other really weird thing about this painting is, why would this artist go out of his way to paint something like this? Is this something that he really saw in the sky? Or as some people will say, well, it's just a form of symbolism. There are many works of art from the Renaissance and medieval times where the painters were just depicting angels of the Lord, angels of God, looking over various people. Well, okay, maybe not angels, but what I want to know is, why did the artist decide in his painting to include down here a man and his dog looking up at this object? Even the dog seems perplexed, if you can. And again, when you look at the original size, you can't even see the dog or the man, and yet there they are. The painter put it in there for some reason. But let's not overlook the actual object itself, circular, giving off beams of light. Well, we've seen that, again, in photographs or from reports by people. And then we move to the year 1710. Here's an interesting painting called The Baptism of Christ. And you see the group of people, presumably with Christ in the center for his baptism, and yet above them in the sky, there's, once again, this large circular thing, and beams of light seem to be coming down from it. If we zoom in on it, again, it looks so much like typical UFO reports or pictures. You don't see a lot of pictures of the actual beams of light. You'd have to be very lucky to have an encounter where you can catch that kind of a moment. But again, were these people trying to deliberately inform the masses about something extraordinary that was going on in their lives? When it comes to UFO images of any kind, it's important that you ask yourself, who do I believe? Because it's always going to come back to that. Who do you believe, depending on what you read? I'm not even here to ask you to believe anything I say today. If there's any message that you come away with, is that don't believe everything you read or hear or see or talk about UFOs. You have to form your own opinions based on the available evidence and how that evidence has been analyzed. Now, when it comes to UFO photographs, now we're talking most extraordinary photographs of all time. And you got to go back to 1950 for this. These are two of the most controversial UFO images ever taken by Paul and Evelyn Trent on their McMinnville, Oregon farm on May 11th, 1950. In this first shot, you can see the circular object very clearly seen in the sky, and we zoom in on it, and again, it looks like a very typical circular reported UFO. And so then it shifted its position a little bit in the sky, and Trent took another shot of it. Again, here's the faraway shot, and if we zoom in on it, and that's what it looks like from a slightly different angle. These two images are widely considered to be the most famous UFO photos ever taken. And of course, because of that, they're the most hotly contested ones. You remember, if out of the hundreds of thousands of UFO photos ever taken, and at this point it could be millions, especially with the invention of phone cams where you can just snap anything anywhere in digital cameras, if only one is the real thing, in other words, not a fake, not a hoax, not the planet Venus. I don't think that the shot that we just showed could have been Venus. Not a conventional aircraft, not an optical illusion, and on and on. If only one is truly unidentified, then wouldn't that really open the possibility that we're talking about a machine from somewhere else? I'm not saying where. Maybe it's another country. Some people say, oh, center of the Earth. Some people say other planets. Oh, no, it can't be that. It must be other dimensions. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I'm a writer. I'm a reporter. I'm supposed to ask the same questions that I hope you will ask as well. But I will tell you this, that these two photos that you just saw, they were among the many UFO reports and images that were analyzed and looked at by the government's official UFO study project from the University of Colorado. It was known as the Condon Committee. And when they published their findings in 1968, buried within the book, which pretty much debunked and explained away most UFO sightings, it said something totally different about the McMinnville pictures. Basically, it said this is one of the few UFO reports where all the factors investigated appear to be consistent, that an extraordinary flying object flew within sight of two eyewitnesses. So again, they were upstanding people, the Trents. They claimed they actually saw the object. The government normally says, no, there's nothing to it. We've never ever had any evidence presented to us that we'd even consider as possibly merit any kind of scientific interest. And within their own final conclusions about UFOs, they said, well, this is one of those we really don't know about. So again, I ask you, who do you believe? My other favorite UFO photo sequence of all time comes from Trindade Island off the coast of Brazil. On January 16th, 1958, a ship containing a large number of scientists, had a member of the Brazilian Air Force, had a group of explorers. They were off the coast of Brazil near Trindade, and they all reportedly spotted this strange object that first appeared near the horizon as it approached the ship. And so in some of the early shots, you can actually just barely see it on the horizon as it approached the island. Came near the island, and they noticed that it had what appeared like a ring around it, like the planet Saturn. And for me, this is probably my all-time favorite image. It just was stuck in my brain for so many years, because then the object took off at a high rate of speed, and these images, the whole sequence of images of the Trindade Island UFO, they were eventually confirmed and released as authentic by the president of Brazil at the time. Now, I've even heard, I know recently, some people are claiming that the photographer of these images had previously hoaxed some UFO images, and so therefore these must not be real. Well, the problem with that is there were so many eyewitnesses on the ship who all said they saw the same thing. So it does remain a very compelling case. And it eventually led, the image itself was one of those things that led me to wonder more about UFOs. And in 1973, I'm not sure how many of you will remember this, but there was a big wave of UFO sightings all across the country. People from almost every walk of life were either reporting UFOs, trying to photograph them, wondering about them. Talk shows were talking about UFOs. One very famous case involved an Army helicopter over Mansfield, Ohio, where the four-man crew almost collided with a helicopter, but instead of colliding with it, the UFO went above the helicopter, hovered above the helicopter, shot a beam of green light into the cockpit, and bathed all of the controls, and they said that it was pulled up. Their helicopter was pulled up several thousand feet in a matter of seconds, and they didn't even know it. There were eyewitnesses on the ground. The Army didn't try and keep them from talking. Very compelling case, and there were more cases like that in 1973. And so that was when I first started my own serious research, because I didn't know who to believe. That was the first question that I had. Who do I believe? The skeptics, the non-skeptics, the believers. Are these books that I'm reading believable? I didn't know. And so the more I read, the more I wanted to hear the voices of people that I was reading about. I wanted to hear from astronauts, from government officials, from this guy, the helicopter pilot, Major Larry Coyne. I wanted to hear from people like Betty and Barney Hill, the famous New Hampshire couple who, through their UFO Encounter and possible abduction experience, it's the most widely publicized story of its kind. And so through a variety of contacts that I made in New York City, I convinced CBS to let me go around the country with a gigantic tape recorder, a cassette recorder that was like this big in 1975. I had it carried on my shoulders. It broke my shoulders as I would arrive to people's homes to interview them on these little cassettes. I think the word Dolby first came into existence, and I didn't even know what Dolby meant. There was just a switch on it that says Dolby, and I figured I'd put Dolby on, it might work. And so I ended up interviewing a lot of people all around the country, and the end result was this, that at the beginning of 1976, vinyl, do any of you remember vinyl records? You've just aged yourself. Well, here's the kicker. You could, this is a vinyl record, and it marked the first time that a major company like CBS would back a product like this. in an early attempt at disclosure of UFOs. And it was also the first time that a major UFO product was actually sold on television in a 2-minute commercial. And what was great about the commercial was it said, if you send in your money now, you get the album and you get this best-selling book, Beyond Earth, Man's Contact with UFOs by Ralph and Judy Blum. But you can order either the record or 8-track tape. Got some 8-track tapers out there? You still have the machines that don't work? Keep them. Sell them on eBay someday. And I'm so honored about this particular album was, this was also at a time when Dr. Hynek had been approached by the Edmund Scientific Catalog, world-renowned catalog of scientific products, and they asked him to put together a page of a few UFO products that were available that he thought that the public should really take advantage of and pay attention to. And I was so honored when they put this together, and he wrote the page for them, and that he included my album down there on the bottom left as one of the products. And I don't know if you can see it really closely, but at the time, they were offering it for, I think, $5.98, a bargain. Now, there's another thing that was happening while I was traveling around the country putting together this UFO album. I got a call one day from Dr. Hynek, who said that he was getting calls from law enforcement officials, sheriff's deputies, highway patrolmen, police chiefs in rural Lumberton, North Carolina. And he didn't have any investigators there, and he asked me if I would go down to Lumberton and check it out, see what's there, interview some people. And I said, well, yeah, I'm working on the album, the UFO album, but what are they reporting? And he said, well, they're reporting this V-shaped object. And I said, what do you mean a V-shaped object? I haven't heard of V-shaped UFOs. Again, this was 1975. He said, well, I haven't heard much about them either, but they claim that there's something going on down there they can't explain. Will you go check it out? I went down. I checked it out. I wanted to see a flying saucer. Who doesn't? I wanted to see something that was a typical flying saucer, circular, but that's not what happened. Within a few hours of my arrival at the Lumberton Sheriff's Department, I was already on the phone back to Hynek saying, look, there's something weird going on here, because as soon as I got there, the reports started coming in, and we went out to this field. There were about 6 or 7 patrol cars. We would all converged in front of a big field there, and as we watched, across the field in front of us, it was a clear, starry night. There was no moon. From the other side of the field, we saw this thing above the tree lines. It was pulsating white and red, just moving slowly, very slowly, and it stopped in front of our line of vision. Then it started moving slowly across the field to where we were, very slowly, no engine sound, so we ruled out helicopter, and then it stopped right above us. It hovered above us. And then, as we watched it, I will explain, it was like a V-shaped. And it had a row of lights up one side, a row of lights up the other. And there were various people who actually made drawings. This was one drawing that came out of what it looked like to this particular person. Okay. And then another person drew it more like a boomerang with a large spotlight up near the top, a row of lights up one side and lights down the other. And I had to get into the act. Here's my drawing of what it looked like. Now, as this thing was hovering above us, that big bright light that you see at the top there, it shot a beam of light right down to where we were standing. And I remember thinking, well, okay, I'm feeling pretty safe and secure here with these police officers and their little 6-shooters. And then I thought, wait a minute, what am I saying? If we're here to be appetizers, I'm done. Guns or no guns. It's like, okay, the beam of light lasted maybe maybe 4 or 5 seconds, longest 4 or 5 seconds of my life. I was a combined, totally excited and totally afraid, and all thoughts of wishing it had been a flying saucer were gone. It's like, wow, okay, this is pretty cool. Now, what am I going to do about this? The beam of light went back up into the craft. The lights turned off. The whole thing turned like a blood red color. Is the only way I can describe it. And it started pulsing, just pulsing red, red. Turned slowly, silently, and moved off. We all scrambled into the cars, started chasing it, staying in touch with each other through the car radios. And every other little town and county that we stopped in, I found other police officers who had had their own private encounter with this thing. And one guy, a police officer, Gary Moore, who was on patrol in his town, and he told me that he was just sitting in the front of his patrol car when the whole car inside just lit up. And he just kind of looked out, like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters, to see what was up there. And this thing was parked in the sky right above him. He very calmly got out of the car, walked to his trunk, pulled out this big old police lantern light that he uses, like an emergency light, and he shined it up and he blinked at it once. He said the thing blinked once. He blinked at it twice. It blinked twice. I'm thinking Close Encounters of the Well, and I wasn't thinking, because that was 2 years before the movie came out. Okay? And then the thing turned and went somewhere else. Well, I ended up putting a report together. Ted Phillips, landing trace expert, was involved with that as well. And Dr. Hynek finally published it as the Lumberton UFO Report from the Center for UFO Studies. And I've noticed ever since then, and I'm not taking credit for being the first guy to see a report of V-shaped UFOs, but it just seems weird to me that ever since then, now all I ever hear about are boomerangs, UFOs. I wrote a story last year, I called them Dorito-shaped UFOs. I also found another interesting thing that I saw this thing in 1975. Boy, it looks a lot similar to something called a stealth bomber. I'm not trying to make anything out of that. I don't know if we had stealth bombers that were flying around Lumberton, North Carolina in 1975. But from what I understand, the stealth bomber does make some noise, I believe. This thing had no engines. And I've even been told that maybe what I saw was a kite. But we had checked with the FAA when we were down there, and they originally said that it could have been a Piedmont airliner that we saw. Well, Piedmont airliner, come on. I mean, do we really have silent Piedmont airliners? And I couldn't grasp what the guy was trying to say to me, other than trying to avoid it, and I kept pushing him. They finally changed their idea and said, well, we're not really sure what it was. And they said that the person who made the original report to the press that it was a Piedmont airliner, he could not be identified. See, I wonder why. So we got the album out, and it did quite well. And being the impatient person that I am, I was not satisfied. I wanted to continue doing some more things that I would hope would help to get more information out. And I wanted to do it on a kind of a bigger stage than just a vinyl album. And I noticed in 1977, a man named Eric Gairy was making speeches at the United Nations. He was the Prime Minister of Grenada. And he was trying to get the UN to pay attention to his personal crusade of UFOs, claiming that he had seen UFOs in his country, many people had seen them there, and that he wanted the UN to establish some kind of way that nations could share UFO information. And so I had an idea, because I realized you can't just go to the United Nations. You can't walk in off the street and say to security, I would like to do a UFO presentation here. May I? May I come in? They throw you right out. You have to be an accredited delegate of a country that is even possibly interested in doing something like this. Well, all I had to choose from was Grenada. No other big country wanted to talk about UFOs. So I sent a copy of my UFO album to the Grenada mission in New York with my compliments, got friendly with some of the ambassadors at Grenada, and said, please give your prime minister my record, and I'd like to meet him sometime. And so they did, and I was invited to the UN on the night when Aert Gairy was knighted, became Sir Aert Gairy. Whole big pomp and circumstance ceremony. And that was the night that we met, and we spoke privately, and over a handshake deal, we made a deal where I said to him, Mr. Prime Minister, you're trying to get the nations of the world to pay attention to you, but they're not, with all due respect. And yet I have people who would be willing to be part of a presentation, people like J. Allen Hynek, Jacques Vallée, Gordon Cooper, Army Captain Larry Coyne. I mean, I can bring some people forward who can make a presentation that people around the world will listen to and try and get your resolution across. So we made a deal, and basically, shortly after that, I received a letter from Grenada saying, yes, the Prime Minister is ready to open the Grenadine coffers to you, which amounted to a few checks that they gave me to travel around the country and get speakers together and pull all my documents and written materials together. And it basically said that they were committed to the goal of getting the United Nations to put something together about UFOs. And so once I got this letter and I knew that Grenada was behind me, then I put the idea across to Allen Hynek, because without him, there was not going to be any presentation. And so he got back to me from the Center for UFO Studies and said, yes, I'm ready to do it. I believe in this. I've tried to go to the UN before, haven't been able to do any kind of presentation. And so, yeah, it's a global phenomenon. The Center for UFO Studies endorses what you want to do, and I hope to be present at the UN at that time. Well, yeah, of course you're going to be there at that time. And so shortly after that, I started lining up all the participants. And in July of that year, we had a closed-door meeting with the Secretary General, Kurt Waldheim, at the UN. And the meeting had some pretty interesting people. Astronaut Gordon Cooper, Jacques Vallée, astronomer Claude Poher, who was in charge of JPAN, the official French UFO government agency at the time. Next to him is Allen Hynek, Sir Aert Gairy, the Secretary General, and this gentleman who was with a special political committee, me with my Wolfgang, I was going to say Wolfgang Puck, but that's not true. He's a chef. Wolfman Jack. That's what I was trying to think of. Sorry, we'll cut that out of the DVD. and author Len Stringfield and University of Colorado psychologist Dr. David Saunders. Pretty amazing group of people, and we met to get it all together to find out what we were going to do. The Secretary General wanted to know what our plan was for the November session at the United Nations. Now I'm going to give you this great example. This is like astonishing to me, and I love this so much because it's an example of how media gets it wrong, okay? This is an article that came out a few years ago, and I've deliberately deleted where the article came out and written because I don't want to get sued. But there's one of several pictures at the top that showed us all sitting together up there. And basically, you're going to like this, okay? The article says, in 1979 in Miami, wait a minute. First of all, it was 78. It wasn't Miami. The only time I've been to Miami was when I was 13 years old. It wasn't Miami. It was at the United Nations. And they say an ad hoc conference of UFO experts under the UN auspices was held. The above photo was taken at the Miami conference. No, it wasn't. I was there. And it was at this meeting that a bloodless coup put Maurice Bishop in power in Grenada and ousted Gairy. No, that didn't happen. With the ouster of Gairy, the UFO talk stopped. Okay, what really happened was we presented the UFO presentation, and in fact, even before November, Gairy, who was supposedly ousted already by Maurice Bishop, here he is, he was standing in front of the General Assembly, letting the various nations know that we were going to be doing this presentation in November. So he looks pretty healthy there for a guy who should have been ousted in Miami. And he was basically talking about how the presentation would really try and convince people of the global consistency of UFO reports. Because they were happening everywhere, people weren't reporting flying pink elephants. And the presentation came, and Alan Hynek spoke, and then so did Jacques Vallée, and so did Army Captain Larry Coyne. And the great thing about Captain Coyne was he came there, and the only red tape that I had to go through with the Army to let him come to the United Nations to tell the world about the harrowing helicopter experience over Ohio in 1973. The only stipulation that they made was that he appear out of uniform. And I didn't have a problem with that. I didn't mind that he was just going to wear a regular suit. It was the story that was more important than to have the suit. After the morning session, there was a UN press conference, and one of my afternoon speakers, our old friend Stan Friedman, okay? See Stan over there with his totally funky 1978 suit. Wolfman Jack there next to him. This is one of the ambassadors from Grenada. There's Sir Aert, there's Alan Hynek, Jacques Vallée, and Captain Coyne. Interesting group of people. And at one point, Sir Aert took over the conference and really wouldn't allow any of the other speakers to talk. And if you look very closely at this picture, look at my eyes. I'm looking at him and like, what are you doing? Let's get real. Let's talk about real UFOs here. Another one of the things that happened that I was very happy about was, even though Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, was with us in July of that year to offer support, he wasn't able to make the actual presentation in November. So I asked him if he would write a letter that would basically be distributed. I had to make many copies of it. It had to be translated for all the member nations, and a letter in which he would describe his own UFO encounters, including one that landed out on the dry lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base in early 1960s, where he had a film crew who captured it on film. He had the film, and he was ordered to send the film to Washington, and it was never seen again. It was a circular craft that came down on 3 legs. They filmed it, the legs went back up, and it shot away. And so Cooper wrote this letter in which he basically wanted to let the United Nations and the public know about his feelings about UFOs and how it's important to establish some kind of a coordinated program to at least scientifically collect the data. The translation problems alone were enormous. And he wanted to talk about also why many astronauts are reluctant to discuss UFOs, because so many people who've written bad stories, bad media coverage. And one of the first stories that came out about the presentation that I was proud of was my first story that I wrote for Omni magazine, in which they actually gave me a cover story about the UN presentation. So no, there was no ad hoc meeting in Miami. It's amazing to me how people can get the facts so wrong. And now, at the same time that all this was happening at the UN, something else interesting happened for me to actually thrust me into media, to really put me in the middle of it. And what I'm about to show you, I don't think you've ever seen before. And I don't want you to be startled by it. Don't leave the room because you think it's a hoax, but I'm about to show you a real alien. Okay? Get ready. Here it comes. Now, I can tell by the hush that you totally believe it, right? I was approached in 1978 by NBC Radio. They asked me to come on and do nightly UFO reports. That was unheard of for such a big mainstream radio station. And I said, yes, I would really like to do that. And they said, oh, that's great, but there's one condition. We want to, for the first year that you're here, we want to kind of create a little intrigue about who you are. And so we want to introduce you on the air every night as the alien. I said, okay. All right. What else? And they said, oh, nothing else. Well, there was one thing. They said, we would like you to wear a special costume. And you'll like it because we're going to have the costume designers at Saturday Night Live make it for you. Yeah, that really helped. I said, look, so far this is all sounding great, but are you going to, if I agree to this, will you let me come on the air and talk about the things that I want to talk about and report on the things that I think should be heard? They said, oh yeah, whatever you want. And so I said, okay, I agreed. They built the costume. Here's a shot of me getting into it. Little side note, the guy behind me to the left with more hair than me, Bob Pittman, the president, the man who actually created MTV. He was the program director at NBC. He hired me at NBC to do this wacky stuff. And then it wasn't enough that they had me put this costume on, but I had to go out on the streets of Manhattan. I actually went on 6th Avenue and stopped a bus. And I didn't know if the bus was going to stop, actually, when it saw this thing approaching it. But in order to protect me, NBC hired and sent 2 armed guards with me. Yeah. And on this particular night, we left NBC and we had to walk up 6th Avenue to a place called New York, the Discotheque. Yeah, it was called the WNBC Radio Interplanetary Ball, and hosted by the alien. I had to dance in this costume, and the head was molded to my head by Saturday Night Live. I couldn't breathe in this thing, but you know, bless their hearts. When I eventually left NBC, I tried to keep the head, but someone had stolen it. Who would want this besides me? I wanted that head. I wanted it on my mantle. I didn't even have a mantle. I just wanted it. But no. But it gave me a chance to get little bits and pieces of publicity while I was actually there at NBC. I spent 8 years on NBC Radio talking about UFOs, unexplained phenomena, and what was also amazing was that when I started working there at 78, I got a call one day from Stan Friedman, who said that there's a story he started investigating, and he's found some military people who were involved with something that happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. He said, you might want to talk to some of these people. I can arrange for it for you. And this was really my first foray into Roswell, because the public really didn't know that much about it. I wasn't the first media person who was talking about it, but I was one of the first, because Stan really wanted to get the information out. And you've probably all seen this particular newspaper headline. This was the headline that went around the world, followed by this headline the next day, which basically said it was just a weather balloon. So now, fast forward 50 years from 1947, let's fast forward to 1997, to something that happened just down the road from here. Back in March 13th, 1997, ever heard of the Phoenix Lights? This was like a really big deal. It involved more than one encounter. Many people reported a series of strange lights that appeared, started blinking one at a time, forming an almost boomerang-shaped pattern over Phoenix. Now, at the time, the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, he was an eyewitness to a gigantic boomerang-shaped object, but later in the evening from when these lights that you just saw appeared. Because he had gone home and his security force had already left him, and he and his wife were watching the news on TV. People were claiming they were seeing lights near Phoenix. He said, honey, I'm going to go check it out with no security people. And she said, just be careful. And he was telling me a few months ago that he got into his car and he went to an area that people were approximating seeing this thing. He got out of the car and he said this gigantic football field-shaped boomerang object passed right over his head. And it totally humbled him. But he waited 10 years before he went public with the story, because he was concerned at the time, in 1997, that the public might actually panic at the news. So 3 months after the March 13th sighting and all the media attention that it got, Symington held a press conference where he made fun of the whole thing, and he said that the culprit had been caught. And at the press conference, led out in handcuffs, a member of Symington's staff, I think it was probably his chief of staff, pretended to be a captured alien. I know a little of what it's like to be in an alien costume. He actually looks like he's a little more comfortable than I was. But again, it raises that question. Who do you believe? Symington now will easily tell you he thinks that what he saw was a craft from another planet. He can't prove it. It's hard to prove, but that's what he thinks it was. Several months ago, you may have heard about a new initiative from the White House called the We the People petitions, where the Obama administration made it possible for anybody, any American citizen, to write a petition, to send it into the White House, and if you got a specific number of signatures to it, then the White House would be compelled to respond. And so, well, of course, UFOs were on the agenda very quickly. And the first petition that came out from the Paradigm Group basically was asking for the White House to formally acknowledge an extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. Well, they got the number of signatures that they needed, but did anybody really think the White House was going to say, okay, you got us? No, that will never happen. And so the White House had to issue a response, and they did, basically saying the title was Searching for ET, but no evidence yet. And they said the U.S. government has no evidence that life exists outside our planet, but we're looking. Okay. And they're still looking. More petitions came and went, and we're still looking. Actually, the petition thing now has pretty much died, as I suspected it would, because I think that there are other ways that media can handle trying to get information out there. Here's another story about how people got it really wrong. Last October, NBC Sports, they used to do these Sunday night football games, and coming out of commercial breaks on the games, they would show these little 30-second videos that would spotlight something about the host city where they were broadcasting from. This particular night, it was in New Orleans. They came out of the commercial, and there was a video that showed, well, in fact, let me just show you the video. See if you can spot anything mysterious in the sky behind this cathedral. You got to look because they're moving fast. Some to the left, some to the right, some behind the cathedral. Do you see that one? Okay. Now, I'm going to show you the video one more time. And okay, now, I'm going to point out, don't even look at the sky anymore. Look at how fast the clock is moving. It's moving pretty rapidly, the second hand. And if you look below, near the ground, where the fence is, you can see people and cars and buses and cabs moving really fast. You see how rapidly everything is moving in the bottom? While the fence seems to be moving in real time, okay? But nobody really noticed all this other stuff going on in the bottom when it was happening. The next day, the media was filled with, what were those UFOs streaking across the sky in New Orleans? What was this all about? I wrote a story about it. I didn't know. I had questions. Again, I was asking, who do I believe? I didn't know. So I put a story up there. I put the video up there. And I got an email from a man named R.D. Willis. And he basically said, I'm the guy who took the video. Do you want to talk to me? I said, yeah, I sure do. And R.D. and I got together, and we talked, and he sent me what you just saw. He sent me his own first-generation copy of high definition. So this is a better copy that you just saw now than what NBC had shown. This is his own personal copy. He uses a time-lapse photography computerized gear. And basically, when you freeze it, and you freeze the frames down where those streaks are seeing, that's what the first object looked like. And people were saying, well, it can't be UFOs or something from another planet because it's too big. And it can't be going behind the cathedral. It must be insects flying close to the camera lens. That must be what it is. Well, okay, so here it's obviously emerging from the other side of the cathedral spire there. It had gone behind the cathedral and it moved away. So we basically had the one shot from the right coming out of the cathedral spire and going away. So I put this story up, and I basically said, folks, it's not a hoax, it's not a UFO, because R.D. said in order to do a time-lapse photograph or 30-second shot like that, it takes over an hour for the computerized rig to move it, to get the final shot. And I said, okay, well, what were you doing during that hour and 10 minutes? He said, I was just sitting there watching the planes coming behind the cathedral, coming in for a landing. It's no big deal. Well, the floods opened up, the floodgates, and I started getting letters and comments from people calling me the lowest form of trolling journalist on the planet, lower than, in fact, the National Enquirer. Yeah, because who the hell did I think I was trying to perpetrate a hoax on the American public? Of course these were UFOs. Of course the UFOs are interested in the football game. And one guy actually wrote to me and said, are you kidding? Is that the best you can come up with? Is time-lapse photography? He said, you the media, are the worst kind of debunkers. And suddenly I thought, now I'm a debunker. Now I am an agent of disinformation. Yeah, it was amazing. Really, I mean, I didn't know what to say about it. People accused me of the same thing about the woolly mammoth story a couple of weeks ago. That it's like, I tried to claim that this was a hoax, and people were jumping all over me. No, it wasn't a mammoth. Fine, in your dreams. So now, again, it's that whole concept of who do you believe? Don't believe me, but don't believe everything you read. Just last week, I love this story. Last week, this article came out. Maybe you saw it. President Eisenhower met aliens in secret 3 times. Okay? From Wednesday, February 15th. And it basically says that former President Dwight Eisenhower had secret meetings with aliens, according to an ex-US government consultant. that the president met extraterrestrials at a remote airbase in New Mexico in 1954 after FBI officials made contact through telepathic messages, according to Timothy Good. Timothy Good is a very excellent author and researcher. He's a favorite of the International UFO Congress. He's a really good writer. And yet it says here that according to Mr. Good, who worked for the Pentagon and Congress, said there were many witnesses to these encounters. And then he also said, according to this article, that Good said that aliens at the first meeting were Nordic in appearance, nice-looking aliens, but that a deal was signed with a race called the Alien Greys. Well, okay. I got an email a few days later because I wrote about this. I put this story out there because this is part of what I have to do. I'll write a story, and I will basically say to people in the story, do you believe this? If you've got more information, let us know. But at least I want to make you aware that this stuff, a lot of it crap, is going out there and it's trying to form, to get people to form different ideas and opinions about UFOs. And I'm not claiming that there's a shadow government out there. There's all this black box or black budget technology, and I don't know about that. I don't care about that. I'm just trying to look for a little bit of truth in and among the deception. And so just before I came here from New York, I got this email from Timothy, who basically said, where the story said that the president had met these FBI officials and telepathic messages, he said that was a fabrication. I never said that to anybody. It said Mr. Good worked for the Pentagon and Congress. No, he never did. He was invited to the Pentagon once to have a meeting with someone. He didn't work for them. That Good said that the aliens at the first meeting were Nordic in appearance. No, it never happened. How much of this stuff do we have to continue to go through and read about and sift through before somebody cries out, enough? Give us some actual, real truth. The skeptics would say, well, we've been doing that for decades. Just pay attention to us. Okay, there are some skeptics that I consider my friends. There's one very, very excellent one who's probably sitting in this room right now. I won't mention his name, but even skeptics can be friends to the true believers because the skeptics are trying to keep us all honest. That's all you can hope for. We live on this planet. Whether you believe in UFOs as real extraterrestrial possible visitors from another planet or another dimension, or if you think it's all one big hoax, and if you think that every single UFO report and photograph and video can be explained, one thing is for certain. That we live on a planet that's in what is known as the Goldilocks zone. Have you heard that phrase recently? The Goldilocks zone. This is an area that astronomers tell us is where a planet has to be just far enough away from and close enough to a sun or star, be in that zone they call Goldilocks, where it has conditions where it can be inhabited. Now, I'm not saying that it can be inhabited by us or what other kind of life forms, but there is this Goldilocks zone. And we have to remember that the sun that we look at every day, it's just one out of billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And we also know now from years of ground observations, and more recently from the remarkable work of NASA's Kepler spacecraft, that there are, in fact, hundreds of planets that have already been discovered in our galactic neighborhood. This is a fact. This is not fancy. This is not speculation. We now know that there are hundreds of other planets out there. And when you look at a picture like this, not this picture, that picture, every little dot of light that you see here is a sun. You know, we forget when we say, oh, look at all those nice stars. But a star is a sun. And now we know that suns have planets around them. You know, we have to try and grasp this concept because it's a big concept. And Kepler is proving this now. Kepler has even begun to confirm planets that are in their own Goldilocks zone for habitability. It's been in the news in the last few weeks. Of course, again, we don't know what that means yet, whether Earthlings could live on one of these planets. We certainly can't even get there. I can hardly get across town in a cab in Manhattan. It's tougher to get on the subway to go home. But to try and get to another planet, sorry, we don't have warp speed just yet. And we don't even know if anything's living on any of these planets that could be habitable. All that we know is that the possibilities of life elsewhere are growing every day. And while mass media still doesn't always get it right when it comes to UFO reports, I think we're trying to do it better. Because in the end, I think the truth is a little better than deception or hoaxes. Those of us in the media would really like to keep the public informed, but we need to do a better job. I need to do a better job. I need to not smash my microphone when I reach up like that. We need to do a better job of sifting through a lot of the noise and the garbage that's out there. We need to do a better job of reporting. And we have to comprehend that we live in a galaxy that's just one of billions out there. Now, this image, you might think, well, look at those nice stars. No, now what you're looking at are galaxies. Each of these things that you see here contain billions of stars. These are not individual stars you're looking at. These are individual galaxies that the Hubble telescope has brought us. And here are more. Individual galaxies, even though they look like stars. So, like I said, the idea of trying to comprehend this is probably way beyond us, but at least it can give us a different perspective on when we're talking about UFO reports, to try and keep an open mind. And here's yet another. These are all galaxies you're looking at. But it doesn't mean that we're insignificant. We are a vital, growing species. And so it's important that those of us who are in media learn to do a better job. We have to generate accurate information about a subject, UFOs, that this could end up propelling us into an amazing future. And a future where we inevitably may find the answer to the ultimate question of whether or not we're alone. Or do we happen to just be citizens in a very crowded neighborhood? We already know that that's probably true. Now we need to try and find it. Thank you all for coming today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Oh, hi. And now let me present. Do we have any time for any questions?
Sure, yeah, you got it.
Do we have anybody who would like to ask any kind of a question? I think you can come near here. I've got a microphone that I can give you. Are we doing okay on time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here comes.
Okay. Are you going to be our first question? I guess I don't need this. Yes, speak right into the microphone.
Back in 1973.
Don't be afraid of the microphone.
Back in 1973, Frank Church's Senate committee uncovered some things in the CIA. One was the MK Ultra program. The other was something that became known as Operation Mockingbird, where it was learned that the CIA had some 300 journalists in the U.S. and around the world writing stories for them. They were officially on the payroll. And at the time, this program went back to the early days of the CIA. In other words, they had journalists on the payroll from 1947 when the CIA was created, included, I think, the Graham family, of the Washington Post, and Edward R. Murrow, the one commentator, was supposedly part of this program too.
You've really thought about this, haven't you?
Yeah. The program was supposedly at the time discontinued as a paying program by the director of the CIA at the time was George Herbert Walker Bush.
Yeah.
And he supposedly made it a voluntary program rather than have them pay them. I wanted to ask your opinion as I feel the program still exists today and is used to debunk the UFO phenomena, and I wanted to get your comments on that.
I don't know to what extent the government is debunking UFOs on an official level, but I will tell you this. Last year, are you familiar with Nick Pope? Nick Pope, for those of you who may not know, another favorite of the UFO Congress here. Nick used to be the project chief of Great Britain's Ministry of Defense UFO office. He did this in the 1990s. And one of our conversations last year, he told me that, and he apologized for this, because he hadn't talked about this publicly. Excuse me. He said that part of what he did, what he was supposed to do, running the UFO office, was he was part of the policy, the official policy, that ridiculed and debunked UFO reports and the people who made those reports. And I said, well, why was the British government doing that? He said, because we didn't know how to tell our citizens that there was something operating in our skies that we couldn't control. And so when I heard that, that was a really important statement for him to finally say and for me to hear, because I realized that it may not just be something that was akin to Great Britain, but probably something that happened here, and it may still be a policy here, although I don't know. I think that if you want to find the right kind of information for that.
I was going to say the CIA summary of the Robertson panel says they're going to use the mass media to debunk the UFO phenomena.
That's
and
right.
Presumably these people that they were paying would be the
and a result of that was when you have a policy that debunks people, that debunks what good citizens, honest citizens have come out and publicly revealed that they've seen or experienced, and then you have a system that says, no, you didn't see it, you must be crazy. A lot of good people's lives have been ruined. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people won't talk about their experiences, because why should they bother if they're just going to get dumped on by the media, by their country, by their government? Yeah, it's still an ongoing situation. And I can't stop it, but I tell you what, if anybody wants to know more about these things, you ought to just check out theblackvault.com and go see what John Greenwald has put together. It's the largest private collection of previously classified documents, and go to the section where you can look up CIA documents.
I just wanted to mention, I think that after the Robertson panel, Captain Edward Rappel, who was head of Blue Book at that time, reportedly told Donald Kehoe of NICAP that they were ordered to explain away as many sightings as possible and to even ridicule witnesses, and he said we even have to ridicule our own pilots.
Sure.
So,
thank you. And I think Donald Kehoe was one of the best, earliest whistleblowers, and probably one of the best initiators of real disclosure on UFOs. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Lee. Have you read Preston Dennett's recent book, UFOs Over California?
No, not yet.
In it, he has a well-documented account of the 1954 meeting of Ike with, he says, 5 alien races. All kinds of corroboration with people that were there, from enlisted men to much higher people. And he also claims that the Eisenhower Library was getting so many requests for information about the Ike 54 incident that they had to specify one person to be the expert on this and collect all this and be able to respond
Right.
to all these things. So were you aware of that information at all?
No, the only thing that I know about that whole Eisenhower thing is the video that I wrote about a couple of weeks ago from former New Hampshire Representative, I believe Henry McElroy, I believe his name was, did I have that right? Who, after he retired, he had some people come to his office or his home to videotape him in like an 8 or 10 minute video, basically saying, when I was still a congressman, I was privy to information, an actual briefing document that was prepared for President Eisenhower, in which the document said that there were aliens currently in the United States in 1954, and that a meeting could be arranged with the president if he so wanted to. And McElroy goes on to say, and I'm only saying this now, and I'm not going to say it again, and I don't want to talk about it again, and he won't give any other interviews about it. He just wanted to go on tape to say, this is what I saw. I don't know if Ike ended up meeting with any extraterrestrials, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did. That's the only other part of the story. So even in what I was saying before about what these people were saying, what Timothy Good said, I wasn't saying that I didn't believe that Eisenhower had such a meeting. I was just trying to point out how the media coverage screwed it up, which is just totally different. So I'd like to know more about it, because if Eisenhower or any president had a meeting with extraterrestrials, well, isn't that like the biggest story of all time? Wouldn't it be? And so, sure, why wouldn't we want to know about it?
Okay. Well,
I will look for that.
There is more to look up about that.
Yeah, okay, I believe it. Thank you. I like how everybody's standing in this little cube and expecting to be
I'm right here in the cube.
beamed out.
Just one quick question.
Yeah.
Regarding the Jerusalem UFO,
Oh, yeah, boy, did you love those?
do you have any special inside information, or just what is your opinion about the veracity of those?
Okay, here's what I'm going to say about Jerusalem. At the beginning of 2011, several videos went viral. They went all over the internet claiming to show a UFO that had come down over a mosque in Jerusalem.
The Dome of the Rock.
The Dome of the Rock, thank you. And it supposedly came down as a ball of light, hovered over the dome for a moment, and then there was a brilliant flash of light, and the thing shot up straight in the sky, and where it supposedly joined other UFOs in the air. And one video after another came out where it appeared like they had videotaped it from different vantage points, from different points of view. And I thought, wow, this is great. Look at this, different videos, and this is like evidence. And then, I didn't think I was going to say this name while I was here, but you forced me into it. Then I noticed that at least one of the videos had something to do with a man named Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen is the man who came out with that woolly mammoth video a couple weeks ago. He came out with a video last year that allegedly showed a little gray alien standing in a forest in the Amazon rainforest behind a group of kids, and the kids didn't seem to be fazed by it. I saw it, and I thought it actually looked like the alien was urinating in the brush around him. Oh yeah, if you can Google it and see. You see I'm right. and he's come out with many videos, including the Jerusalem one, where he actually puts out his own little video and says, "I am Michael Cohen, and what you're about to see is this week's smoking gun evidence of what I say is evidence that we're being visited." And so I wrote this piece a few weeks ago, and I basically called him the P.T. Barnum of the modern age. He's like the new impresario to present these things to a public that is so hungry for information that they will accept the tabloid stuff that comes out. And that's what happened with the Jerusalem UFO. It looked like at least two of the people that were involved knew each other, and that was again another red flag that went up about it. So yeah, again, when it happened, I thought it was great. Look at these videos. Even one of the videos it appeared like someone had taken a video camera, shot a picture of the mosque, froze it, and then added a soundtrack on top of it of people going, oh, look at that, when in fact there was no movement on the picture. You couldn't see any cars, any lights blinking. You could actually see the pixels in the television screen. Again, it's like, who do you believe? But yeah, thank you for asking. Hi there.
I thought the weather camera also made the official weather camera captured a separate picture of that.
Of Jerusalem?
Ball also, yeah, in Jerusalem, just one shot, you know. So it led a little more credibility to me. But the question I wanted to ask was when you were going to North Carolina to investigate those flying saucers, and you really was hoping that you were going to see a flying saucer.
Right.
Why didn't you bring a camera?
Well, you know what? It was 1975.
Yeah.
We didn't even know what digital cameras were in 1975.
Well, not digital, 35 millimeter, you know.
People actually took pictures, and
Yeah.
all of the photographs that came out were the bright lights against dark background. That was it. Nobody got anything better than that. I agree. I went down
So there
there.
was pictures, they just weren't very clear.
Yeah, and I've seen them, and they're not even worth showing because it's like you see like a black sky and just like a blotch of light. No one had, at the time, at least not there, anything like an infrared camera that they could have used, like they use in the Hunting Bigfoot series where they're out in the woods trying to find Bigfoot with infrared. Yeah, I wish they had. All we have are drawings and my little drawing. But yeah.
It was interesting, I just was wondering about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Hi there.
Practically every week, the History Channel
Yes.
has a program on UFOs
Yes.
or aliens and so forth.
Yes.
In view of that, are you surprised that a reputable magazine like the Scientific American doesn't seem to have any articles on it or looked into it?
No. You know what? It's like the New York Times, all the news that's fit to print. It's up to the individual editorial department to make decisions on what they want to put out there. If Scientific American doesn't want to cover this, that's fine. They're losing out on an interesting, substantial audience for readers. But no, there've been articles about UFOs in something like Popular Science, okay? But if Scientific American doesn't deem it to be of any scientific value, like the Condon Committee back in 1968, then
Just not an important subject.
yeah, it may not be important to them, and I'm okay with that. Let them write about it. It's a very excellent magazine. I have no problem with that. Thank you for standing in the rectangle.
Could you tell us just briefly what the outcome of your meeting with the UN was? What developed from that, and whether the UN has any current official involvement?
Grenada had come up with an actual resolution where we were hoping to put together a small committee, maybe a 3 or 4 member committee that would operate out of the United Nations. And what they would do is they would coordinate efforts all around the world with members of heads of state, prime ministers and presidents to share UFO information. The translation problems are enormous. And that was one of the big hurdles to get around. All the information that I brought to the meeting, I had to have translated into several languages. So we did our presentation in November 27th, and then the Secretary General invited all other member nations to contact him and to say if they were interested in pursuing such a committee. And he told them that if you are interested, let us know when the Special Political Committee reconvenes at the beginning of 1979. And so they were waiting for information to come in, and it was right after the beginning of 1979, that's when Eric Gairy was ousted in a political coup. Not in Miami, but it was at the beginning of 79. And so when that happened, then the UFO initiative just kind of quietly went away. And there have been stories of people claiming, well, conspiracy. The conspiracy theorists have been coming out saying the United States and the Soviet Union, they just orchestrated the whole thing. I will tell you this. Let me tell you one other thing. Last year, Great Britain released about 8,000 pages of previously classified UFO documents. And my editor said, go ahead and write a story about it. It's a good story. So I did. I started looking at some of the documents, and I'm going through the documents and I'm seeing these references in their documents that they have decided that they're going to try and convince the United Nations in 1978 not to go forward with this scheduled UFO presentation. And I'm going, what? They did what 33 years ago, and I'm just learning about this? And so I called Nick Pope in England, because he used to work for the Ministry of Defense, and the first thing he said to me was, I've been expecting your call. Yeah. And because Nick Pope, even though he's not with the Ministry of Defense now, because of his relationship with the British government, he gets early access to their documents before they're released publicly. So he knew he was going to hear from me somehow. He said, yes, apparently my government did try to stop the United Nations presentation. And I said, but why? What's the problem? He said, because Great Britain thought that if the UN went public on UFOs, it would destroy its credibility. I went, well, they don't need to talk about UFOs to destroy their credibility. I mean, why pick on me? I mean, really? Why pick on Grenada? And he said, well, look, first of all, he said, you can't blame me. I was only 13 in 1978. But I'm giving you an unofficial apology right now on behalf of our government for what they did to you. Thank you. Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.